Let's get started. Inna, can you show us what you brought?
I sure can. I brought a very large stack of books.
As big as your head. And Lavanya, what did you bring?
I brought this little thing that my daughter made.
Ooh.
So
I'm hungry. Well, yeah, we'll save the details. We'll save
later.
The
Okay.
second. Yes. Well, first of all, the two of you, welcome. Thank you guys for saying yes to be here. For those of you who are watching or listening, you are tuning in to the podcast, Not Quite Strangers. My name is Valerie Hope. I am your host. And the purpose of this podcast is to bring two relative strangers or not quite strangers together. And we're going to have meaningful conversation, right? Create connection, build curiosity, and in our own special way, challenge the status quo. So who you're going to meet today, they've never met each other. Well, with the exception of what, like 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, we had the initial meeting. But one of the reasons that I invited these two amazing women is, first of all, Inna and I have known each other maybe a year and a half, probably not very long. Inna and I have both been, well, we are both coaches with the Berkeley Executive Coaching Program. So we've had many conversations since we've met then, and just super high energy. She has so much to offer, fun loving, always concerned about other people. And I thought, I know exactly who I want to introduce you to, because someone that shares exactly the same qualities is Lavanya Challa. And Lavanya and I have known each other 4 years. Maybe something like that. It's been a few years. And we know each other because we've taken a lot of the same leadership development courses. Lavanya was actually also on my last podcast, Time to Come Alive. So you may have heard and seen her before. And Lavanya, when I thought about who I would introduce you to, I thought, okay, it would be perfect because you guys share a few things in common. You're both wonderful mothers and devoted to your children. You both have your own artistic, creative flair in how you do what you do. And I said, again, you're kind, loving, positive people in the world up to something. And I'm like, this would make a perfect union, a great match. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Valerie, for having me.
Yes. Thank you.
So first, a few things for those of you who are listening. If you do not want to miss a single episode of this podcast, please make sure you subscribe to notquitestrangers.com. And we'll make sure that you get an email whenever a new podcast episode is released. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Connect to Joy. And you'll have both links in the show notes so you can easily access them. But before we jump into anything else, I'd love for you, Inna and Lavanya to share with us the stuff that you brought, the stack of books and this dessert-looking creation, Lavanya. Tell us what you brought and why it's meaningful to you.
Lavanya, do you want to go first?
Okay. So, this keeps falling off. So this is something my daughter made, and this is tape, packaging tape. This is a styrofoam orange that fits perfectly in, and this is from another toy that, she poked it in and kept it. Now, why I brought this, because if you see, it's got lines. It's not quite perfect, but if you look from far away, it looks great. But when you examine it up close, it's just a bunch of random things put together. And I think that's kind of what represents me as a mom. I'm not perfect. I don't have it all together. And I'm still, it looks great from outside. I'm just going with the flow. And every time I look at this, it kind of makes me smile because I get a peek into how her brain works. Really unique, and at how she makes these little creations all over the house.
And we should say, so this is your daughter, Divya.
Divya.
Yeah. So yeah. Divya. Okay.
She's the one with autism, and she does her version of lining up things. So if you walk around my house, there are papers stuffed in the crevices of a door sticking out. She makes them kind of balance in that nook. Or she'll put things inside each other, makes them into stacks. And initially I know I'm going into too much detail right now. I don't know. Do you want me to
go for it? Yeah, just share. Okay. Go ahead.
she does all these arrangements, and initially it was like she's just making lots of garbage. But then when I looked at it, I'm an artist, and when I go out there and I'm looking at art shows, there are all these installations that people make with found objects. And I thought, wait a minute, she's just doing that. She's repurposing. She's not like, making garbage. She's making art installations. So once I started looking at it that way, it was no longer like something unwanted, something wanted. So that kind of represents the whole thing for me.
Wow, that's actually quite profound, right? Just a small shift in perception. Well, it sounds like it's a big shift, but it's also really a simple one where the value of something shifts when we shift our perception of it.
Yeah.
Really good. Okay.
Wow. I love that reframing of the narrative, and I don't know if I can follow with something nearly as eloquent, but I'll do my best here. I brought this stack of books. I know you asked us for one object, but I also, Valerie, I'm an extra kind of person, so I brought an extra amount of things. And the reason I brought these to represent my role as a mom is actually because I've approached being a mom as more of a job than I initially thought it would be. Like I've been a big, I really didn't think that I would research and study and do all of that as much as I've done. And I think part of that is circumstance. I have my older daughter is not on the spectrum, but she struggles with an anxiety disorder and a panic disorder and a sensory modulation disorder. She's really explosive. And so a lot of that has been by necessity. I've really had to learn how to deal with and approach her unique personality and temperament type. But in general, I take things in life like, I don't know how to do something part of the way. When I do something, I go all in, and that's been representative of my role as a mom too. Like I do things 120 million%. And so I've read so many books on my journey as a mom. So that's why I brought this big stack of books.
I love your extra self. And yes, you should bring extra to family. And Lavanya, did you write down the name of that book?
I did.
I was just like, I saw her scribbling. Why? So why did you write it down? What was it about that?
I like the word explosive child. It has so much like a positive spin on things rather than a fix it kind of view. It looks like a very kind of putting your hand around them and then including them, including their mindset. And yeah, I don't even know what the book is about, so I thought I need to look it up. And I'm crazy about buying books. I may not read them, but I need to have them.
Lavanya, one I wanted to bring today that I couldn't find on my bookshelf, I must have loaned it to someone, was called Raising Your Spirited Child. I don't know if you've read that one, but that's a wonderful one.
It's on the list.
In fact, and you'll see a lot, there's a theme: living with intensity, freeing your child from anxiety, letting go of perfect for perfectionists. So there's definitely a theme among the books I collect. But Raising Your Spirited Child is another one I would really highly recommend.
Okay.
I think what's interesting is that both of you are finding or have found ways to reframe this idea of what motherhood is going to look like, especially with, you both have 2 children, I believe, right? Both you have 2, yeah, and Lavanya, you have 2. But I'm curious, before we get into all what you've done to reframe, what did you expect motherhood to be like? Like before when you had maybe the idea of being a mother, before you were even a mother, like what was that like?
Do you want to go first, Inna?
Sure. I thought I would enjoy it a much higher percentage of the time than I actually enjoy it, to be honest with you. I love being a mom, but I've wanted to be a mom since I was, since I could remember. I've wanted to be a mom. And my whole life kind of revolved around when I would become a mom. And so I was surprised at like the amount of work it is and the amount of time I want to break from it. And I need something else. Like I thought motherhood would be, I think, all sustaining and everything I needed. And I've been surprised that that alone is not enough for me. I love being a mom, and I love it much more when that's not all I am. And I really didn't think that would be the case.
Interesting. Lavanya, what about for you?
It's like she's almost said what I wanted to say, but yeah, I wanted to be a mom since I was a kid, and I only thought as far as a 2-year-old's being a mom of a 2-year-old. I didn't even know, or maybe let me say it this way: it came with so much work, so much losing control of how things go, like so much learning every step of the way that it's a whole new world in itself being a mom. And I'm not the perfect mom, but I do love my kids. I do love, and I'm okay with how I parent. Like, yeah, it kind of, I don't know what else.
You accept how you parent, and,
Yes.
or yourself as a parent. You accept yourself.
Yes, both.
Both, all
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I can't say much about that, and other than I never had the desire to be a mother. I have no idea. It's not like I don't want kids. I don't like kids. On the contrary, I love children. I think I'm good with kids, especially the older ones. Like the older ones, I'm much more engaged by, have good conversations with. But I'd never had that, oh, to be a mother. So it's been perfect. So I'm not a mother, which is great. I never had to make that decision. And I'm a great stepmother. So FYI, if anyone's out there, he's out there looking for a stepmom. No, don't look. The police do not look for me as a stepmom, but that would be an added bonus, right? But what I hear the two of you say, which I think is really interesting, I know a lot of my friends who did desire, this desire to be a mother for so many women is something that's so innate and so defining, right? Becomes so defining. So I'm curious about, so when you had, now that you have both, you are mothers and you're mothers and you're having to handle whatever it is that comes up through motherhood, what are the areas where you've like surprised yourself or like been really either surprised or disappointed, or like when you've had a completely different experience or reaction than you expected yourself to have, or has expanded you in some way, shape, or form as a person? And did that question make sense?
I can take that first. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have one thought on something I'm better at than I thought, and one thought on something I'm worse at than I thought. So I'll start with the positive. The thing I'm better at than I thought is I used to, before I had kids, I remember questioning if I would ever be able to be as selfless as my parents have been with me. So my parents have given of themselves to me and my brother in unimaginable ways. And I was always on the receiving end of that, right? Like I was never the giver, I was the taker. And so I remember worrying even before I had kids, like when I have kids, will that shift? Like I want to give of myself in that way, but I've always been the taker. And so will I have to struggle to be the giver? And I have to say that's one thing that I was shocked to find, like, nope, not a struggle. Like so naturally, innately easy that I give because I want to give. Like I want to give to them everything. And I actually have to stop myself from giving to them everything because that is not good, right? Like they need the struggle. So that's one thing that I guess has been easier for me than I thought. One thing that has been harder for me than I thought, and Lavanya, you touched on this when you spoke, and it shouldn't surprise me because I'm a little bit type A. I'm a little bit like, I like knowing how things go, but the lack of control I have as a parent both in terms of like things that happen all the way starting from birth, right? From like delivery and how you think that will go and how that actually goes, to now, like how, like the type of temperament your kids have and how you have to work within the framework of that temperament. And you can make tweaks here or there, but you're always working within that framework. That lack of control has been much harder for me to deal with than I probably, if I had thought about it, I probably would have been like, that's going to be tough for me. But I hadn't really thought about it or considered how little control you have. And that has been really a tough one for me and a continual work in progress.
Lavanya, what about for you?
So the question is, what surprised me and what was
Maybe
difficult?
surprised you like in a positive way, and what surprised you in like a disappointing or challenging way?
What surprised me was the fact that how much autism taught me to be a better parent. Like you said, Inna, about, the framework. I've been trying to make my older one fit into a box. And until the second one and her autism came, I didn't realize how much I was, unconsciously just putting her into a box and trying to push her to be in the, set parameters. And then I realized with her that I started questioning every single thing. Oh, why does she need to finish school in 12 years? It should be okay if she finishes in 13 years. Oh, if she wants to, like things like that. Oh, I never thought it would broaden my perspective as a mother to include a lot of these, variables like uncontrolled, out of your hand things. And the other thing that surprised me was how much each kid has a personality. I am constantly struggling to kind of accept that, because when they're born, they're this, they're not a thing, they're not a personality, and then you start seeing something coming through. And with my 13-year-old, like you met her, Valerie, she's a unique personality. She's like
She only 13 or
unstoppable.
30?
I know. That's
Whoa.
how she is. And then my now 8-year-old, for a while, I was that she was not there. Like only the autism's there. And lately, last year, I saw, since the pandemic, I've been seeing her personality. That like there's a certain flavor to her since she was 3, and now we see a whole new human being. Like she's shy and she's friendly. She's all those things that I never saw before, and that's been a total surprise for me. And something that's been the hardest, the most challenging is, yeah, I'd say, sticking to a schedule. Like we're like the broken schedule family. There's no schedule. I just like a typical Sagittarian, like let's just go with the flow kind of thing. And that's been the worst thing. I thought I would, motherhood would fix me and I'll do all the things on time. And in one word, I'm a hot mess. The way we parent, but yeah.
Hot mess. So, it's interesting because what you guys are both pointing to is actually not limited. You're really talking about your broad view of your experience of mothering, right? From the very beginning, what you expected to like some of the reality check. But the last 12 months have been really unique and pressure filled and has shifted our focus. So I'm curious, what does mothering for you guys have? What has that looked like during the pandemic?
Oh goodness, I can go. It was the hardest. It was like the like the final most difficult test in my life. Like be, like the initial month, being home all together, no school, no therapy, nothing, and it was so hard. I hadn't spent that kind of time with her since she was diagnosed with autism. She always had therapy or clinic visits and support, and I had to really stop everything and be with her. Let her, like, I got to one, there was like a positive and a negative side to it. I discovered so much about her. Like, all the things she does do, we don't get to see that at home. She displays this, all her skills at her clinic. Like, all her therapists know how much she can do. And at home, she behaves like she hasn't learned a thing in the last 3 years. And so we got to see all the things that she's capable of. And we got to see her creativity, like, unfold. Her interest, she started interacting with us, but it was also challenging. Like, she had problem behaviors come up, because we relied a lot on going out to entertain her. And all of that being cut, just we couldn't provide everything that they needed. And so it's like my older one's 13, and those 12 years are one kind of learning. And this just last year is a whole new learning in itself, like a lifetime's learning.
Your facial expression right now. What is going through your mind?
I'm just listening, and it's so funny because I've had this conversation with other mom friends, right? Like, what's it been like? And I've heard a lot of like these similar themes reflected. And I think my experience has been a little different. It's been challenging for sure, but I think we've had more silver linings than I would have expected during this time. So my older one also gets, she's in occupational therapy, and she sees a therapist, like just a regular therapist, a psychologist, therapist. And we shifted both of those to virtual when the pandemic started. So she was continuing to get them. She was just getting them virtually. Is that as good? No. But was it something? Yes. So we didn't lose them entirely. But my husband started, working remotely, and we developed these little, it felt like our life before the pandemic was, so I'm sort of the opposite. I'm very scheduled, and our life is always very like, I'm very like strict on bedtime and strict on mealtime and strict on like, we wake up and then we eat, and our days have always been so structured and routinized, and often rushed from one thing to the other thing to the other thing. And mornings were just the worst, because it was like, get up, brush your hair, eat food, put on clothes, like I just felt like a constant military sergeant, and it feels not great. And I, the last year we've been able to get away from some of that. Not that I'm not crazy about bedtime. I still am. Like, bedtime is bedtime. We go to bed at bedtime. But we've been allowed to like have mornings be slower, right? I don't need them to get up and get dressed and make it to school on time. And so that's been a silver lining. I think I've shared with you, Valerie, that I actually live with my family in a 3-unit house. So my parents, my mom and dad, they live in the bottom unit. My husband and the girls and I live in the middle unit, and my brother and his family live in the top unit. And so we have kind of this sitcom family compound situation going on. And so like every morning, sorry?
Sitcom family compound.
Yeah, so every morning for the last 10 months, the kids wake up and they run down the back stairs to my parents' house, and they have breakfast there, and a lot of times watch a cartoon, and I'm like pretty strict on screen time, and certainly no screen time in the morning. But I've kind of like bit my tongue and been like, that is such a special memory they're creating with their grandparents. Like, they are going and watching a cartoon and eating, and I'm sleeping in a little bit, can't complain. So yeah, I relate to a lot of the difficulty, but I have to say, this last year has had more silver linings than I would have expected it to. When this first hit and schools were closed, and they initially closed for 2 weeks, I remember like I was on a text chain with my 2 best mom friends being like, oh my God, 2 weeks, what are we gonna do? Right? And now it's been a year almost, and we've made our way through. It's really shown, like, I think we're stronger than we give ourselves credit for, than we think we can be.
I totally get that. We should probably know a couple of things. One is Ina, you're in California, and Lavanya, you live in Texas. But
Yeah.
I'm curious about how your cultural upbringing, because you both come from different countries too. So I'm curious about how your cultural upbringing or any aspect of your past, your culture influences how you've been dealing with your parenting and or these challenges that you've just mentioned. How's that influenced it?
Lavanya, you want to go first?
You guys are
Okay.
so nice. You're so polite. Like, it's your turn. I went last. You went.
Okay. Okay, you have to ask me the question again.
No, so the main thing is if your culture, right, in any shape or form has had an influence in how you parent currently, or how you've been dealing with some of the challenges or some of the things that have shown up in your parenting.
Um, I've definitely been consciously drifting away from my cultural influences, although, especially like the inherited conversations around how I should raise them, how I should do things. Like, we grew up with, kids don't question parents. Like, that's how you showed respect. Or you don't ask a kid an opinion. Or when you're fighting, the kids are not allowed to have a say. But I think we've been consciously moving away from that. My husband keeps, he'll ask my daughter, "What do you think?" And the other day, I think also another factor is me and my husband are not like a typical married couple. Like in the Indian setting, you give respect to your husband. But or there's a certain amount of hierarchy. But our relationship, we're more like peers, like classmates, and there's a lot of this tug of war, like playful tug of war, like two pups pulling on the same toy kind of thing. And so it's a different dynamics. And me and my husband were coming up with a game to kind of support each other with our health goals. And then we had these, okay, if I win, I'm going to make you wear a pink shirt, and that I think motivates me. And then we were coming up with things, and my daughter said, "Can I have a say in this too?" And so we've been trying to raise her like that, like that they have a say. They can question us. And so when my husband, says something to her like, "You didn't do this," he keeps training her to say, "You need to say, no, I did it," or question it, or ask a question back, and not just take it when I say you did it. And so I think that's a couple of the things we've been trying to move away from. And the other things, I think cultural influence this year that kind of supported is reaching out to community and asking for support, asking help. And it's not that that was there or wasn't there. I'm the kind of person who does everything on my own, alone. I don't ask for help. And so it's, I had to, like, there was no way I could handle it all on my own anyway. So, partly from my culture, reaching out for help. And I'm in a country where I don't have relatives, I don't have my parents here. My husband's parents are not here. So, it is really the community you create that I could go ask support of. I have just a few relatives, but they're not even in town. So I would say that's kind of how it's showing up. And then, I'm sort of the rule breaker kind of person. So I've been breaking every kind of mom rule when
Like
eating on time,
oh,
eating on time. For a while, I did, eat whatever you want kind of thing. Like, I didn't make everything from scratch, and I let them kind of take us in whichever direction they wanted to go. But then, when gets out of hand, I put my foot down and say, okay, no, come back. Let's start from square one. Let's work on this. And so there's a lot of trial and error.
mm,
And I'm not sure where that comes from, but maybe also because my mom was like that. She was not really strict. She would let us learn, um, let us try. So I think that's kind of what I've that influences me.
Yeah,
And
I
she
want
was never really, oh, sorry, an
to.
absolute no. My dad was like that, but my mom was pretty open-minded and broad-minded. She'd let us try things.
My parents were the similar. No, they were not peers. I just say that. I don't think so. At least not from the outside in. That's not the impression I got. Although I think my mom's version would be different than my dad's version of that. But one thing is so funny because just this past weekend, for example, my dad is 76 years old, and he's always been kind of like, the strict, right? Get this done, do it this way. Why hasn't this been done? He was not an encouraging, question me kind of guy. So your husband, I'm like, cool. That's amazing, because that would not have happened. But my dad is like that now, much more. He's much more open and more flexible, which I heard that does come with some age and wisdom. But what was so fascinating is that he's always been kind of tight-lipped about himself and his experiences, but he expects us to ask if we want to know. He doesn't like volunteer it. And I'm the only girl, so I have certain rights as the only girl, I guess, certain privileges. And so I've always been asking these questions. So I know things about my dad and ways in which he was brought up, and things that my brothers haven't asked him about, because for whatever reason, this just wasn't that dynamic. But so this weekend we did what's called Getting to Know You in 20. Basically, I got questions from the family, 20 questions from everybody in the family, and my dad agreed to answer them on video.
Oh, wow.
So I interviewed my dad and just asking him questions from my 9-year-old nephew to questions from my mom, who's now his ex-wife, questions from my brothers. And it was so cool. And for like an hour and a half, he just shared everything from the worst thing he did when he was a kid to, the last time he took off his army uniform and what he thought. And like, it was really, really fascinating.
Wow.
So I think the role of dads is huge, which I want to talk about too, because sounds like, Lavanya, for your husband, his take on how to parent also influences or supports, right, what you're up to and where maybe you're challenged. So it sounds like a really interesting dynamic and partnership, which I wish my parents had. It would have made life so much easier at home. But now I can appreciate it as an adult that it wasn't the time, I think a different generation too. So it wasn't meant to be right now, but they're getting it. It's never too late. That's my message there. What about for you? What's resonating in this?
God, I relate to a lot. So I was born in Russia. My kids are first generation. But I was young when I moved here to America. I moved here when I was 6. So although I'm an immigrant, I'm very much Americanized, right, in a lot of ways. But still, I'm an immigrant, and I grew up raised by immigrants. And I feel a lot of like the push and pull of how when I read these books and think about how things should be done differently versus how I've thought things should be done before I question them, or what expectations are, right? So, and even internally, I still have this push and pull, because yes, I want my kids to question, and yes, I don't want to put them in a box, and yes, like, these things are important, and there are values of respect for elders and things that are so ingrained in me that like are very hard when I don't see my kids do that. And also, actually, frankly, I believe in respect for elders. Like, I don't think they should be disrespectful of elders. It's just shifting, what does disrespectful mean, right? Is questioning disrespectful? Is standing up, right? So that's what it is. It's just changing what that looks like, not what the value is necessarily, if that makes sense. So an example of that might be, I really believe in bodily autonomy. And from the time my girls were
Bodily,
young,
like bodily
okay. Autonomy, right? So from the time my girls were young, particularly they're girls, from the time they were young, if my mom or dad would want to give them a hug or a kiss, or anyone would want to give them a hug or a kiss, and they didn't want to, I was like, you say no. You don't want to give a hug or a kiss. You don't give a hug or a kiss. But certainly the way I would have been raised is like, if your grandma or grandpa asks for a hug or a kiss, you give them a hug and a kiss, right? Like, it is disrespectful not to. And And again, like, yes, I don't want them to disrespect elders or their grandparents, but is saying, no, I don't want to give a hug or a kiss disrespectful? That's where the shift has had to happen, right? To be like, no, you say it in a, hey, Baba or Dada, where they call my parents, right? How about a high five instead? Or how about we play a game or whatever, right? Yeah. Do it in a respectful way. But you can, you don't, like, being a sheep or just saying yes to everything is not necessary. Or similarly, like with academics, right? Like, I grew up in a Jewish immigrant family where academics are of really high importance. And in my family, everyone has been high achievers. I've been a high achiever in terms of places I went to school and grades I got and all of that. And I, you know, and my older one is really academically inclined and like very bright. And her passion right now is theater. That's what she loves. She loves acting. I mean, she also reads like a mofo. Like, she reads 20 times faster than I do. But the girl loves theater. And, you know, whereas maybe I would have been signed up for an after-school math program, I'm signing her up for after-school acting classes or whatever, right? That's her passion right now. And so, again, that push and pull of like, academics are still important to me. I do still want her to, like, you know, have a strong foundational knowledge. But like, if what she's really wants to know a lot about is theater and like this particular actress and whatever, great, go learn about that, like immerse yourself in that. So again, like, for me, the culture piece has been finding ways to not let go of values that are like important to me from the culture I was raised in, but finding a way to like twist or modernize them in a way that resonates with me, like today, with where we live now and what feels appropriate. I don't know.
Yeah, the nice little balance. And I think that's, you know, part of it. So, Lavanya, what are you going
to say? I was
say?
going to say my daughter's into theater too.
Oh, older or younger one?
Older one.
Oh, cool.
She's picked her college. She's really clear about it. She keeps languaging that, and so it's,
oh my God, that's
so many things common.
Get along.
Yes.
My daughter just said to me recently, though, it was pretty heartbreaking. She told me, you know, as I mentioned, she struggles with anxiety, and she said to me, you know, Mom, do you know why I love theater and reading so much? Those are the only times of day I'm able to escape my worries. When I'm playing a character or relating to a character in a book, I get out of my head and my worries. She's 8. She's 8.5. Like, not quite 8.5. She's also been in therapy since she was 1.5. So she's got a good amount of self-awareness and work that she's, you know, support she's been given to sort of like do some self-reflection. But she really connects to characters in books and characters that she gets to play, because I think that's her escape from out of her head.
That's huge. So I'm curious, and Lavanya, were you taking notes? I feel like I'm always
no.
I'm
fidgeting. I'm crazily fidgeting.
fidgeting. So I'm curious about. Look, this is really just the initial sparks of conversation. There's so many avenues to go. And I sometimes don't even know, like, there's so many things that I would love to ask you. I'm like, wow, does it make sense to change the subject? Because I will say, I think at the time that I talked to both of you about being on the podcast, it was around the holidays, like around December or something like that. And the thought that came into my mind is, and I know that you were telling me how you all were celebrating Hanukkah and some of the rituals that you were doing, especially now in light of the pandemic. And Lavanya, you know, you're Hindu, so you don't celebrate Christmas, but you both live in a very Western community, you know, in Western society, clearly, or at least here in the US. And it's so, the Christianity is so in your face during the holidays. So I'm still curious. I'm going to ask it, although it's a complete departure from our motherhood conversation, but maybe not. Like, how do you balance that? Especially you have children who are born and raised here, and, you know, within the confines or the construct of the religious upbringing that you've selected or that you enforce or you model. Like, how do you balance that when there's so much the bombardment of commercial Christian values and morals during the holiday season. You know what I mean? What do you do? Does it matter?
Matters hugely
Do you
to
want
me.
to?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Do you want to talk first, Lavanya, or I can
Go
go?
ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. It matters hugely to me, right? Because as I mentioned, we moved here from Russia, and we moved here as refugees. We moved here in refugee status because of anti-Semitism in Russia. And so my Jewish identity, my Jewish culture is hugely important to me. And my husband is not Jewish. And I'm the first person in my family to marry someone who was not Jewish. And that was a really big deal. Now my husband's not Christian or of another religion. He's just not religious, but he's American. So his family does Christmas, right? Like, and traditionally that's important to him because that's what he grew up with. My husband and I met in high school, started dating in high school. So we had many years of like negotiations, like, well, I'll give you this, but you give me that. And like, how are we going to raise the kid? I mean, just, we're both like come from a law background. So like we were negotiating bits and pieces of this for long periods of time. And ultimately what we came up with is we're raising our kids Jewish, like at least culturally Jewish, right? And it is really important to me, and I think has actually become important to my husband, interestingly, that our kids identify as Jewish. That their like self-identity is we are Jewish. And that doesn't mean we don't celebrate with other people their traditions, right? So with their grandma and grandpa, we go and celebrate Christmas. And with our Hindu friends, we celebrate Diwali and Holi every year. Every year we go. And they look forward to it and they love it, right? And we have friends from lots of different backgrounds. With like our Chinese friends, we go celebrate Chinese New Year. But us, we invite our friends to celebrate Hanukkah with us. Like that's ours. This is theirs. And like we all celebrate with each other and partake in the celebrations with each other. And it's tricky, right, with kids to sort of hold that distinction of like, this is ours and we celebrate this with others and that's theirs and we go celebrate with them. But I think it's been working out okay. Yeah, better than I feared.
Better than you feared. Lavanya, I saw some reflections on your face.
Yeah.
Expressions. What's going
You're very sharp. So I had this question like a few years when we moved here. It's been like 12 years now. And I questioned myself, what do I do? And then I came up with this answer that we're living in this land, in this place, and we celebrate whatever people, like the community around us is celebrating. Like it's like a community celebration, like a region celebration. So we did do a lot of things. Like we would celebrate Christmas, especially because my younger one loves the whole Christmas tradition. She loves decorating a tree. She likes wrappers and all of that. So we do that, even though it's not our culture, and we celebrate other festivals with everyone, like Diwali and we have a few other festivals which are not popularly known, but we do that. And the other thing which has had us to kind of question and really look and choose is my younger one. She doesn't understand culture. She doesn't understand religion. She's still at the level of, communicating her basic needs, learning her abstract needs, and at that stage. So I don't know if Christmas she knows because she knows Christmas and Halloween because of all the YouTube videos. But but all those other things, and I know she might never learn all the details of our culture. She may, but I've had to kind of like Inna said, modernize it, kind of come to a middle ground. And the other thing is, I didn't grow up, even though I grew up in India, I didn't grow up like kind of fully immersed in all the rituals and festivals like everybody around us was celebrating. And we come from a place where there are Hindus, there are Muslims, there are Christians, and we celebrated everything with everyone. It's like my husband jokes that if you give a Hindu, and like you say, Christianity, Jesus is the only God, they'll say, okay, add him to our list of gods. We'll pray to him too. And that's been the case. Like we all used to go to church and yeah. So, I kind of grew up with all of that, celebrating with everyone else, being part of it. Like, we'd invite our Christian friends over for some of these like festivals where you serve fruit and like do these. I don't know if you've seen the red bindi, right? We do all that, and they were really sportive. They would, join in with us. And the other thing is, I grew up in a family where my mom's side was Gandhian, like they were followers of Gandhi, and so they discouraged idol worship. So they were not the kind of people who were doing all these rituals. They were more scientific. Like all the people in my mom's side are scientists, and so it was kind of my husband says you're already from Mars. You don't know any of the things that you're supposed to do. So coming here, it's not much of a like a cultural shock for me, but I'm having to kind of balance it. Then I thought I really love my religion. I love worshiping, and I love some of the festivals. So if I can do that, being the kind I grew up with, I have that interest. So I think even my daughter would be fine. So she has the freedom to kind of choose or not, but we do celebrate. We do, talk about it. And my husband used to tell us stories as a kid, and so, you know, it's an interesting mix.
I can totally see. Well, you guys have done a lot, and I'm sure it's artful and creative in itself to figure out a way to blend all these different things, right? Your values and the values of the communities. But one thing that both of you said consistently is this idea of celebrating with others. And the image that came to mind is like a birthday. We don't begrudge anybody their birthday typically. For those that don't celebrate birthdays, that's another podcast, right? It's a whole different story. But is your birthday, and you might invite people to celebrate with you because it's an opportunity to honor, to connect, to to express gratitude, or however you go about celebrating. But it doesn't have any impact or doesn't have any meaning to the other people who don't share that birthday, but we can celebrate with or celebrate for someone. So I think that was an interesting distinction that both of you shared, is this idea of celebrating with somebody else just because of their special moment or special day or special tradition. Fascinating. So again, we could talk about all kinds of stuff, but I'm really curious about what's the experience like for you, meeting each other, hearing you guys share, like what's there for you right now in this conversation?
Let me go.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Um, I want the conversation to continue. That's where I'm at. And I can see why, Valerie, you thought we'd really, connect, because there's so many things similar. Like we're both from the East, and, we're raising two girls in a different country than where we were born. And I, like, honestly, I'm thinking, Valerie, you should do this. Even if it's not live again, we should, three of us, get together and talk again. Because this is really great.
Oh, Lavanya, before I go to Inna, what did you expect? What
Oh,
was
I was so nervous. I was so nervous the whole time. I couldn't do anything yesterday. Like I was completely like stunned. I was just on the couch. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I wasn't functioning. And then I said, okay, maybe it won't be so bad. Valerie's there. She's a good facilitator. But it's it's that kind of unknown. You don't know the other person. Like I don't know Ina, and it's that unknown. Like how like you don't know if you like a person until, and so knowing that you would meet a person you don't know and you'll be talking. There was so much of not anxiety, but like hesitation. Like I wonder if we'll get along. I wonder if, but usually when you meet strangers, you suddenly make a connection then and there. There's no anticipation of it. So I think the anticipation kind of threw me off,
Uh,
but I enjoyed it. I'm like, oh, it's already over. I could talk for another hour. There's so much to talk about, and the way you facilitated the conversation, like asking questions. I think we never really talk like that when we meet people. We don't like it's interesting to start to know each other from that place rather than start off from, oh, this is what I do, that is what you do, like that. But it's more like an inquiry based, like it gets right to it rather than all that beating around the bush kind of thing. Yeah, superficial kind of thing.
Yeah, so good. Well, that was completely designed in the design of this conversation. So I'm glad that you got it, and we can certainly do this again anytime you guys want to. It doesn't have
You
to
guys
be
free tomorrow?
but what did you expect, and what are you leaving with?
To be real, I expected this. Like, I mean, honestly, like, I think maybe it's from the way you talked about Lavanya, and when you and I had that conversation, you're like, I think I know who you would be really good with. Like, as soon as you started talking to me about her, I was like, oh yeah, like that sounds right up my alley. So I came in anticipating that we would have a great conversation. And I will agree with Lavanya that like your facilitation skills are just marvelous. So it's great to, like skip past the superficial, like bullshit and just get into like the meat of it. That's great. I love that. Get right into like the heart meaty good stuff. But I anticipated that we would get along. I shared this with Valerie. I have a lot of friends who are from India, and like my husband and I find ourselves being like the token white couple in a lot of Indian group. Like we have like a group of there's 3 couples and they're all from India, and then like we're the 4th couple and we're both white, and we're like constantly invited in these. So I don't know if it's like something about me connects with a lot of like that culture or what it is. But like that and everything you told me about Lavanya and everything you told me about her kids, I anticipated it would be this. Like I actually didn't have any nerves. I didn't have any, I had like a lot of excitement. I really did. And I still do. Like I came in with a lot of excitement. I'm leaving with a lot of excitement. Yeah.
That's awesome. See, Lavanya, I should have told you more. Maybe that was a mistake. I had to build it up. But I was also kind of like, how much do I say?
I know.
And for me, it was like Lavanya's already been on the podcast, so she already had kind of the experience. And I felt like I needed to give you a little bit more context because this was your first invitation to one. But I'm really proud. I think one of the things that I love about this premise is, you guys are in my community. You are my community. And where for me is like, how did I get to this type of community? Like, how was that possible? And everything that you all pointed out about, how I might facilitate a conversation. This is the kind of conversation that the 2 of us had. Like, okay, I'm going to ask you guys this just because it's not a test, like your memory test, but I would like for you to think back the earliest memory you have of us meeting, right? Like, what was one thing from that conversation or that interaction that had you still want to stay in contact or even just say yes to me, years later? Like, what is one thing that you remember about that interaction? I'm curious.
It's actually exactly this, Valerie. Like one of the very first things you said to me, and I won't get into the details of it because they're personal or whatever, but it was, there was nothing surface level about it. Like you skipped past any niceties and anything surface level, and you were like, let me ask you something real, girl. And I was like, whoa, she totally went for it. And there was something about you that made me want to be like, yes, let me just tell you, right? Because it was asked, it was not surface level, but it was also asked with a total lack of like judgment. And our conversation had a total lack of judgment. And right away, the level, usually you get to know someone here and you're like, oh, I kind of like that. Let's go a level deeper. Oh, that's kind of cool. Let's go one more. Let's see. Let's keep testing the water and go like a little deeper and see if I still like you. And see. But you just started right down the deep end, dove right in. And I I really don't even, I can't think of a single other person I've had a conversation with where it started right out at that deep of an end. Like, I've certainly had conversations with people where I'm like, oh, I really like this person. Like, I want to keep getting to know them. But there's always sort of like the getting to know you piece. And with you, it was just diving right in.
And I'll have to say that for you specifically, there's a certain openness about a person. Please do not misunderstand that I go around asking everybody intimate, personal questions. Although some people might challenge me on this. But I do find that it does take two for our conversation. And the things that you shared, or your spirit and your energy around the things that you talked about, gave me the sense of comfort that I could ask a question without it being offensive, or without it being, completely like deemed inappropriate or too personal. Like, I don't know this girl or whatever. So there definitely, I can tell also the sense of openness or willingness for someone to engage. And so there's no thought in my mind to invite you to participate in this, because I'm like, yeah, you're open and willing enough to have a random conversation with somebody and still be authentic and still be forthcoming. So that was huge.
You're right, though. It's two-way, though, right? Like, it had to come from me, the openness, but like the thing that made me feel open was also the way you asked it, right? I wouldn't have been as open with a different person asked in a different way.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for that. That's beautiful. And Lavanya, what about you? I still remember when we met, but I'm curious about you.
I remember that it was the assisting, remember, day one. Yeah, we were talking and you asked me some really insightful questions that had me stop and kind of think. Like, usually the kind of things we ask each other, you kind of know the answer. You're well rehearsed in those, but you asked me questions where I had to really stop and kind of look and then talk. And so that's what I remember about you. And you have a unique way of listening, which is kind of beyond what I'm saying. It has a deeper background to it, like a deep, like you can listen what's going on in my background. And then
I can tell you're taking notes, or when you
yes,
when you're fidgeting. That's not it.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. And this was not my attempt at fishing for compliments, but
Sure.
Although I feel incredibly acknowledged, super acknowledged and humbled. But I think more than anything, I think what the two of you are pointing to is that we all have a willingness to be known. Like, it sounds like, at least from what I gather from the two of you, and in my experiences with both of you ever since even that first moment to now, is that there's this willingness to be known. But how many of us take the chance? Like, how many of us really put ourselves out there? Because there is a certain level of risk to asking someone something, like getting to the heart of the matter. And there might be thoughts of like, oh, I don't know if that's appropriate, or, oh, I don't want to offend, or I don't want to be, deemed, or judged or whatever, which I don't typically have when I don't know somebody, don't typically have that, but I do observe whether or not it's a safe time or place to get into those conversations. But that's really the challenge I want to pose for people, for the two of you included, but for people who are listening is, where can we cut through the crap? There's enough out there. There's, this conversation around diversity and inclusion seems to typically fall into that's like the most divisive entry point in a conversation, is about all the pain and trauma, and not just diminish the impact or the import of those topics, but when we're willing to connect meaningfully with people, it's generally in the deeper places. That's where the through line is. And I like to go for the through line rather than start at the surface and then try to dig your way down. It can be a little hard. Maybe not everybody's ready for it, but I'm so grateful that the two of you are, not only for my personal relationship with you, but also with one another. And yeah, it wouldn't have worked otherwise.
I gotta tell you, my cheeks hurt because I've spent the last hour smiling. They legitimately hurt.
Gotta get cheek workout.
I do a little cheek massage.
Yes. Now you're already youthful, but getting a little, you're working that collagen. Yeah. You're working on A nice little facelift today. Good. Any final thoughts or comments for one another?
Oh, I want to get to know you more, Inna, and I really like this conversation together. And I was thinking we should do more of it. Really, like I realized that you're in California, so meeting for lunch would be on Zoom, but
That's okay. Anyone I meet with for lunch these days, I'm meeting on Zoom anyway. So
yeah,
this was, I mean, as I mentioned, this is exactly what I expected. I expected I would love you, but I come out of the conversation with like expectations totally met. And I completely agree. Like lunch or happy hour or just a conversation. I'd love to not have this be the end.
okay.
We can make that happen easy. So we'll do that.
Yes.
You don't have to exchange numbers and stuff
do
when
a
you're
part
online. Sorry?
We can do a part 2 also.
Yeah, we could do a part 2 also. There's more. There's more. This isn't it. So this entire series, for those of you who are listening and watching, this is just a series of conversations that you'll see for whoever, I don't know, however long that'll go, but to expect every single time you'll see a different set of strangers having a different conversation about whatever I think is, deemed worthy to talk about, basically. And whatever comes up in the conversation as well. But really, yeah, if you want to get access to this type of information, please do subscribe to notquitestrangers.com so you get these episodes in your mailbox. And you're in for a new surprise too, because we're going to start adding some personal challenges so that you can take the ideas, the concepts, the opportunity and experience to get to know somebody even better to another level in your own life. So, stay tuned for that. There's more to come. Lavanya, Inna, it has been a true honor and pleasure. And I'm so, so grateful to have the two of you in my circle, to have now expanded the circle so it can be even more inclusive. And I often think, I'm like, don't all my friends know each other? Because they're all amazing people. So now I'm like, check. Yeah, that's done. So very good stuff. And I do want to share to make sure that you all know what's happening. I'm going to share my new, my 14-year-old niece recorded my outro, and I'm so proud of it. This is the first time I'm debuting it on the show. So check this out. Maybe. Not yet. Here we go.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.